We have David King is going to be presenting on our new uh, mushroom identification passport program. So what we've David has been working on is developing a program where people, as they become as they come to be able to identify more and more mushrooms, that they will be those identifications can be authenticated, and they can earn levels of sort of accreditation through their passports that say, oh, I know how to identify this mushroom, this mushroom, and this mushroom. And we're encouraging people to kind of to make their mushroom identification list, something that they can kind of look at and refer to, and hopefully take some pride in. Um, it's not it's not something I've ever done myself, but I want to get one because, when I start thinking about it, I know a few mushrooms, uh, more than I probably realize, and many of you may as well. So we're just encouraging people to have an opportunity to be recognized for, and there will be some wonderful non-cash prizes that will be going to people as they achieve certain levels of success in their identification. We have Billy Rayson. He is a member and active on the 4A committee, and he is an archaeologist by trade, and he is going to be talking about the kinds of things you might find out in the far ends of the woods, that and how you should consider them and look at them, and who knows, maybe even come back and tell somebody about it, because it might be something that nobody's put their eyes on in many years as a historical uh, features and stuff. And then we have Mike Kempenick, the gentleman forager, and he's going to be giving us a presentation on looking for and finding black morels in northern Minnesota. We've talked about them other years, but honestly, John and I do not have a lot of experience in looking for those, so and finding them. So I figured I'd ask Michael to come in as an expert and share his knowledge, because he forages for them often, to give people an idea when they're in northern Minnesota, how to maybe go about looking for them. And then we have Hannah Kim, who is with the Minnesota Extension Service Education, and she's going to be giving us a presentation about invasive species. And there's a couple of things that we want to emphasize, is how to prevent us from spreading invasive species, and what kinds of steps we can take, and best practices to keep from spreading invasive species. And then Hannah is undertaking some work to help identify areas that have infestations of invasive species. And again, this is something that I think foragers and mushroom hunters are somewhat uniquely in a position to, like Hannah, about, hey, I found this back in the woods somewhere, and so that it can be properly mapped, and people hopefully if possible, make remediation efforts and stuff like that. So um, I'm looking forward to partnering with her effort to help her map some of these nasty things. I know I find them pretty regularly, different kinds. So that'll be good. And then I also want to let people know that if people want to stay and ask questions, I'm willing to answer them, and hopefully John and maybe even Mike willing to stick around and answer a few questions if people have some. And with that, I will begin my part of our presentation. Does that look okay?
Looking good.
Looking good. All right.
Yep,
So
looks good.
I'm gonna make this to make this thing go away. Anyway, so what we're talking about, one of our main topics today is all about morels, our very attractive, elusive mushroom, our state mushroom, as a matter of fact. We are the first state in the United States to have a state mushroom. And unfortunately, there's a few other states that have stolen our mushroom, but I'm not going to get too mad about it. So the morel mushroom, early spring mushroom, an excellent mushroom, edible mushroom that, and it, here it is. So a little older one. You can see the pits have opened up and gotten bigger, and looks like maybe slug ate a hole in the stem of that one. What do you need when you're out looking? Comfort shoes or boots, walking stick. You don't want to get lost, so a compass, maps, or more often GPS these days. Some type of non-plastic bag, or a basket. Now, the basket could be perhaps plastic. It'd be nice if it has holes in it. And they're talking about, some people carry mesh bags. I'm personally not a big fan of mesh bags because morels can be quite fragile sometimes. And as it kind of acts like a cheese grater and grates up all your morels into little crumbles. A knife to clean them and perhaps cut them off. You want to keep yourself hydrated and keep your energy up. But when you're out walking the woods, even in the spring when it's cool, you'd be surprised at how much water you can use. Tick prevention. We're going to talk about this in more detail. And binoculars. This is if you really want to, go look at. You don't want to walk over to that place, that tree that you're eyeballing. You're just going to take a pair of binoculars and study the ground around it. So, things you should be doing right now. You should be spraying your clothes with permethrin and check your gear, footwear. Get your state park pass if you need one. And you can scout small woodlots in public areas and local parks where picking is allowed, and scout private land and develop relationships with landowners to get permission. If you already have permission in the past, make sure to touch base with them so that they know you're around and that they still support your going on their property. So here's a list of the current or a partial, let's call this a partial list of tick-borne diseases. Some of them, as you see, Lyme's disease is at the top. We're pretty familiar with that one. And this is not a disease to take lightly. We have several members that have ended up having pretty severe bouts of chronic Lyme disease, and it can be quite disabling. I mean, to the point where they've had flare-ups that put them in the hospital because they couldn't walk. And some people have developed cluster headaches and things like that that can be really, really disabling. Probably the next most common ones that we see in this area is anaplasmosis and ehrlichiosis. And those are perhaps not quite as serious as Lyme's disease from a long-term standpoint, but they will make you sick and you should get treatment for them. We just recently in the Star Tribune had an article about Powassan disease or virus. This is a tick-borne disease, and apparently last year we had a record number of cases in Minnesota. Only 14, but if you get seriously ill from this disease, the mortality rate's about 10%, which is pretty high as far as I'm concerned. And so mostly we don't want to get bitten by a tick. The other one that people have been getting and it's very difficult to diagnose is the bourbon virus. The bourbon virus causes your body to become allergic to an enzyme that is in red meat. And so if you eat red meat, once you've contracted this, 3 or 4 hours later, you will get very sick. And then you'll recover until you eat red meat again. And I read an article here about a woman in Wisconsin who spent over 2 years suffering from this, and nobody could figure out what was wrong with her because it was intermittent. It depends on you eating red meat. And apparently she finally was referred to a doctor in Duluth. And this is one of the things that he's been diagnosing and has worked with. So as far as I know, there isn't a cure for it. So basically you just got to stop eating red meat. So we don't want to get bitten by a tick at all. So after the hunt, you take care of your morels and check for ticks and try to get them. Wood tick, deer ticks. We also have a few other kinds of ticks that have been moving into Minnesota. There's getting to be an increased number of Lone Star ticks. And here you can see how little they can be. The nymphs and engorged adults. They're kind of unpleasant little creatures. I want to talk a little bit more about tick prevention and a product called permethrin, which you can buy Walmart, Target, sporting goods stores, and usually you'll find it in the camping section because it is intended to be sprayed on your gear and on your clothes. And then you allow it to dry. You're not wearing the clothes when you do this, and you allow it to dry, and then it will provide protection. They say typically 3 washings or about 6 weeks. And one thing I want to caution people is if you have cats in the liquid form, it can be very, very toxic to cats. But once it is dried, it isn't toxic. It isn't, shareable with animals or yourself at that point. But the ticks definitely do not like it. There are also options that you can buy clothes that are pre-treated, or there's a company, one of the manufacturers of permethrin-treated clothes. In the past, at least, I haven't checked lately, you can send them your clothes, and they will treat them at the factory. And those clothes are rated for 70 washings. Uh, and I did that with some clothes of mine, and I've had them to between 6 and 7 years, and I have very, very few ticks that seem to stick around on me. I might catch some crawling on me, but it seems by the end of the day I don't have, it's only one or two. They don't kind of build up. So I think they sense that chemical and decide that they should go somewhere else. So I, I found it to be very effective, and I encourage everybody to do their most to keep from being bitten. So when do we start looking for these elusive and sometimes frustrating little guys? Late April to early June. Well, it's the 28th of April. People are starting to find some. And when the yellow morels first come, they start out often as small and gray in color. And sometimes when they first come up, they can be a lot of them. And as the season progresses, they can continue to grow depending on the conditions and the weather. And in the end of the season, we often see morels that are as big as 12 inches tall, just huge. The peak of the season is usually somewhere around mid-May, and the season runs from about 3 to 5 weeks. The morels take usually 10 days to 2 weeks to mature completely. So there is a window there. Um, to kind of see our indicators when the lilacs are blooming. I find this one to be pretty darn um, reliable for me, that when the lilacs are in bloom, that's definitely a time that the morel should be fruiting. When dandelions begin to seed, and when oak leaves are the size of a squirrel's ear. I don't know about that one. I don't know. I don't know what a squirrel's ear's like, and I kind of find that one a little bit amusing. Soil temperatures at 4 inches, upper 40s to low 60s. Some people even get more particular, saying that it needs to be 52 or something like that. But they do usually respond to soil temperature being warm enough. So when you go early in the season looking on south-facing slopes and areas that have less shade, and later in the season you might find them north-facing slopes, down inside valleys and ravines, is where you'll see them then. And where? So again, warmer south-facing slopes, end of the season, north-facing slopes. As all mushrooms require moisture to really flourish. And in the case of mushrooms, fruiting mushrooms, morels will not fruit unless they have adequate moisture at all. And so you can't hardly have too many rainy days in the spring. If it rains, consistently 3-4 days in a row, very, not necessarily heavy rain, but lots of moisture in the air, soaking rains, drizzle, stuff like that, that can be an excellent opportunity to go out and start looking, because they really like those conditions. Where should we look? Our most common thing to look for in the southern part of the state is recently dead or close to dead elm trees. And if we look here, this is a classic shape of an elm tree. So here you see they're very vase shaped. They're a beautiful shade tree, American elms, and and we used to have our streets in the cities lined with them before Dutch elm disease came along. But this is what the kind of silhouette you're looking for, but you're looking for them when they are dying or dead. And here's an example of some dead ones. Now you see here that in this case, the bark has started to peel off, and they usually could produce morels for 3 or 4 years after they die, sometimes not right away, sometimes later. Once they lose all their bark and become totally bald, at that point, they are much less likely to be producing morels. But with morels, one can never say never. I saw a person post a picture today, and there were two morels, and it looked like they were growing out of this person's gravel driveway. So they kind of do whatever they want. Other trees that are worth investigating is poplars, cottonwoods, and white ash. Now, in the case of cottonwoods, even if they're stressed, it can be very good. Dead cottonwoods, recently dead cottonwoods can be good. And white ash, those can actually produce even when the white ash tree is alive. Some people say they've had some pretty good luck finding them by ash trees that have died. My experience has been that I have rarely ever found one by a dead ash tree, but that doesn't keep me from looking. Sumac stands, especially where there's a bunch of old dead sumac. You can find them in there on occasion, and I've seen people harvest quite a few. Old apple orchards. If there's an apple orchard that's no longer being tended to, and there's many old trees that are they're still alive, but obviously very old. Morels will grow around those sometimes very well. River bottoms and floodplains. Our river bottoms had before Dutch elm disease. Supposedly, our river bottoms were about 30% elm in terms of what grew on the river bottoms, and there are still some elm there. There are also cottonwoods that grow there, so that's another option in there. We have disturbed ground for perhaps the same reason along railroad tracks. One needs to be aware that there's all kinds of things that happen along railroad tracks, spills and oil and creosote and stuff like that. So you might keep that in mind. People sometimes find them in their landscaping, and mulch and stuff like that. They can be found in conifers and old aspen, black morels. And out in the western part of the United States, where they have the big wildfires, the year after the wildfires, they can have incredible fruitings of black morels in where those wildfires burned the year before. There are so many of them that grow there that almost all the morels, dried morels that you might find for sale, commercially come from those areas where people have picked them commercially, where those wildfires are. Finding areas to hunt. So here they talk about the Minnesota, this is a little bit older, Minnesota Atlas, DNR website. They have their state recreation map, which allows you to see a lot of stuff. park and forest maps, Google Earth. Keep an eye for those dead trees in the summer when they're sometimes easier to see because they don't have any leaves on them. And really don't be afraid to knock on people's doors. Most people are more than willing to give you permission if they don't pick them themselves. So, and that goes really for all mushrooms. Um, Another thing that you could do today is that most counties have what's called GIS mapping, where you can go on the county website and get an aerial view of all the parcels of land to see who owns them. And sometimes that's real useful because sometimes you'll find parcels of public land, city-owned land, county-owned land, state-owned land, and stuff that you might not find easily in other in other sources. So, it's seeing them that can be tough. So sometimes you got to get down kind of low and visualize and look for the shape. They're usually kind of hard to see sometimes and pretty well camouflaged. And make sure you're looking where you're stepping because it's not unusual to find a bunch of morels and all of a sudden look down and find out you already stepped on one. So, and here's a picture of one hiding on us. And that a little hard to spot. Um, here's some more that are hiding. Here's a few, and you can see there's one hiding here, and that these have gotten look like maybe there was some frost after they came up. They got a little frostbite on their tips that kind of dried them out. Remember that when you find morel, if you find a morel, there's almost always more than one. So what you want to do is get down and be very thorough looking in the area where you found that morel, and very often you will find more, sometimes many, many more. Here's one of our members, taking a great picture with a morel, and he's actually a member that ended up having quite a nasty case of chronic Lyme disease, many years after this picture was taken. So, make sure you move around and look at different angles. Getting on your hands and knees can help. When I bend down and stoop down to pick a morel, I pause and look around before I get back up again. Here's one hiding back there. And here we have a few more. And then here's kind of what we all hope to see. Doesn't happen real often, but it's not never that you have a chance to find quite a bunch of them growing together. It's honestly, it's pretty exciting, I guess, if you're a mushroom hunter. So that's the end of this part of the presentation. I'm going to turn it over to David King to talk about the Passport Program.
Okay. We're ready to go. So the Mycological Society has come up with a program we're calling the Passport Program to encourage people to work on their identification skills. So we're rolling it out this summer as soon as we get started here. And let me just give you a brief rundown of what it's going to be. Probably the best thing is it's all run by the user, and there are pretty nice prizes that are going to come out as you progress through this program. So what happens is you identify individual mushrooms, and I'll show you the sheets that we use for this. We've tested it a little bit last summer. John and I did a couple of identifications, and Aaron Berg and I did a couple. As you complete these identifications, when you get 12 done, you've reached level 1, and you get a prize with chanterelle on it. Level 2 is 12 more identifications, and that's the Morel level. Level 3 is 12 more. Got an indigo milky mushroom on it. And the top level has Amanita jacksonii. So what does this look like? Here's what the graphic for the chanterelle level will be. And here's the graphic for the Morel. And they'll be on different merchandise, which we're getting right now. So how does this work? It's really very simple for a participant who wants to get involved with this. You download the passport form, which we'll show you in just a minute. It's on the website. And then you send an email to passport@minnesotamushrooms.org so that we know you're getting started on this. I'll receive those emails and stay in touch with you. If you have questions along the way, you can send them to me. And we'll help each other out and figure out and make this work. Here's what the passport form looks like. There are 2 identifications on one sheet of 8.5 by 11 paper. You can print it double-sided, so each sheet will have 4 identifications on it. You get 3 complete sheets done. That's one level for you. The person who's participating fills out the top portion, and then when you get together with your authenticator, they'll look at the stuff and they complete the place of identification, authenticated by, and the date. So how does this work? What might it look like? Here's a sample form. When Aaron Berg and I tried this last fall, you can see the form was a little bit different like back then, but it's mostly the same. I prepared this form in advance, and we did this one virtually. I sent it to him with some photographs. We got together on online, looked at each other and shared the photos. I showed him photos, talked about what I knew about these mushrooms. He looked at them and identified them. So those of you who are not in the metro area and want to participate, we've got a way for you to do this. So we filled this out. So you just need to fill your thing out, have a meeting with your authenticator, either in person or virtual, and hopefully this summer we'll get a number of chances for you to meet with an authenticator at meetings, at meetups, and perhaps even at some forays. If the ideal would be for you to have the mushroom with you when you're talking about it, so you can turn it over and show the gills and how they are or are not attached, and here's the ring and all these other things. But if it's going to be virtual, you'll need good photos. So make sure you take good photos and share those with your authenticator. So how might this work? You give a good description, you hand over your sheet. And here's the one I did with John last year at the state fair as we were waiting for them to open up the exhibits for people. I had 2 mushrooms with me and I filled these out. And I even added a great, wonderful, very scientific drawing on the wine cap side showing that there's sprockets. And you can see even those of us like me that have poor drawing skills can come up with a drawing that helps with the identification. John, being the awesome teacher that he is, not only approved it, but also taught me a thing or two about these mushrooms. So it was a great learning experience for me. And that's what you do. Each mushroom that you want to do, you fill out one of these things, meet with your authenticator, and get them signed. You keep your forms. If the authenticator approves your work, they sign it, and there you've got it. It's a winner. Here's the levels once again. Now, to fully complete the level, what we want you also to do is not only these identifications, but do a small presentation to a group. If you're at a foray, perhaps the foray leader will give you a chance to identify one of the mushrooms there, and that can count as your identification. Or if we have meetups during the summer for these authentications, you can do your presentation there. And if you're a very brave person, perhaps you'll come to one of our monthly meetings and do your presentation. You finish that presentation and you've completed the level, then you are awarded your prize. We'll get your photo and put you in the toadstool review. So it's all as official as we can make it. So it's pretty simple. If you want to be a participant, you send an email to passport@minnesotamushrooms.org. And you download the passport sheet, which is available on the website under resources. I know I breezed through this pretty fast. I'm sure that I've missed a few things and perhaps you didn't hear me clearly or I didn't speak well. You can go to the resources section of the website and a description of everything that's happening is there also. And finally, maybe you're a very experienced person, you know lots of mushrooms, you've got them in your head, you're well versed on this stuff. We are going to need authenticators. And if you're one of these people that is well versed in things and you know your mushrooms and you want to be an authenticator and help people, just send a message to that same email address, passport@minnesotamushrooms.org. Put authenticator in the subject line and I'll contact you. We'll do a real brief training. Training is very short, very simple. And we take care of the issue then. And that is the end of my presentation. Let me just hang out here for a minute. And Kathy, perhaps you can get on and see if there's any questions in the chat or if anyone wants to ask a question quick.
Thanks, David. Any questions for David? I put the link in the chat to the MMS page. So you guys can go back and revisit all the info. All right. I am not
David, and
Yes.
thank you so much, David, for that presentation. And one thing, just to
Peter, you're glitching.
when you can you hear me?
Now we can.
Oh, uh, you're talking about people giving a presentation. The idea of that presentation is like you're going to teach somebody else how to identify that mushroom. So it's not a presentation to necessarily a large group or trying to be terribly educational, but like you're going to try to teach your mushroom that they are not totally familiar with, and you're going to share and teach them how to help them positively identify it the next time they see it.
Absolutely.
So very good. Thank you again,
Thank you.
David. John,
Yes.
our second old man,
Okay.
time for you to get technical.
Okay. So now here we go. Okay, so the scientific side of things. And Ron usually does this, so I'm gonna step in and take over for him on this. So we all know that it's a mushroom, so it's in the kingdom of fungi. Well, there's a lot of things in fungi, and then there's a lot of things that are mushrooms, and mushrooms actually fall into a couple of different categories. This particular one from Morels falls into Ascomycota, which basically for lack of a better way of saying it, they're spore shooters. But that's because they bear their spores on a different kind of substance than the Basidia mycota, which is the guild mushrooms and the boletes and stuff that we're really familiar with. They have a tendency, they bear their spores on a different structure, and they actively expel their spores some distance from that spore-bearing structure. Here's all the other stuff. Pisies, Pisiza mycotina, et cetera, et cetera. And here's the actual ascus, or that, let's see, he already changed the picture, but the family is Morcheliaceae, genus Morchella, and every true Morel falls into the genus of Morchella. And there's a number of other related mushrooms, however, that are in this Pisizel order. So the primary ones that, at least the closest thing that we're going to come up with for the scientific names for our particular mushrooms that we find, the yellow morel is the Morchella americana, Morchella angusticeps is the black morel that Mike will be talking about a little bit more. And then there's another little one called the punctipes, Morchella punctipes, which is the half-free morel, which is technically also a black morel, but it's markedly different. And we started finding it in pretty gigantic numbers down here recently, the past several years. Okay, advance. Okay, so this is what cup fungus in the Pisizel group tend to look like, okay? So you got to imagine that a morel actually has all these numerous cups that are in those pits and ridges, and it has these the many, many, many ascus, that all these little ascospores are lined up inside of. And those are the things that get expelled out into the wind and get shot out. So, some of the little cutesy things that you may have seen online where it's like you're buying a spore bag to carry your morels in, so you're dropping the spores back behind you. Well, it's not exactly like that. It's not like Johnny Appleseed where you're dropping the seeds or the spores behind you. They're actually being expelled out. So just the act of cutting and handling them to some degree is actually helping the process of the spores being discharged. Okay, next. Okay, so this is the classic yellow morel shape. You see the pits and ridges. Peter already pointed out that oftentimes there'll be holes in the stems where you'll have slugs or other things that have kind of burrowed into that. Next, please. But here you'll see on a cross section that a morel, true morels, are absolutely hollow on the inside. They may get pinched together a little bit, and you may end up with some additional little structures, but not really very often. In general, they are extremely, extremely hollow on the inside. In fact, one of the little, cutesy little phrases we use is, if it's hollow, you can swallow. Of course, you have to cook it first. But they are perfectly hollow on the inside. And one of the things you should do is when you harvest your morels, you should cut them in half anyhow, because otherwise you're going to be eating ants and dirt and some other things that may crawl up on the inside. And it's the way to make sure that you actually have a true morel. Next. Okay, here's what a half-free morel looks like. And you notice that it is markedly different. And there's so much more stem to them. And they have a slightly different flavor. Okay, go on to the next. But you'll see on the inside when when you cut them in half that they're only connected halfway up, whereas the the other the black morel, the true black morel, and the yellow morels, they're connected. The cap is connected all the way to the stem. So that's where this gets its common name, the half-free morel. That it's connected halfway up, but it is totally hollow on the inside. There's a number of look-alike mushrooms that have pithing on the inside or cottony material or chambers and other things on the inside. So those are not true morels at all. True morel is always hollow on the inside. Next. Okay, and here's the black morel. Mike will be talking about this a little bit more. And I don't have a lot of experience directly with these because these are something that you'll find much further north. Once in a while, you find them you find them in this area, but I haven't ever stumbled across them. Next. Okay, and you notice on the black morel, and this is one of the features of them. Many times they're a little bit more conical and a little bit more pointy on the top, but also where the cap and the stem attach, there's actually a small indentation. So that's another one of the features that you'll see oftentimes in a black morel. I'm sure Mike will talk about it a little bit more. Next. Okay, so these are close cousins of morels. These are verpas. Some people will call them early morels, but they're thimble heads. But you notice, especially on the one on the far right-hand side, that it's like a thimble on top of a pencil or something. All right, it's only connected just at the very, very top. And on the cross section of it, it's got this pithing on the inside. So it's not hollow on the inside of it. I will say some people actually will eat these. I have never eaten them in certain places, Indiana, Michigan, where they do their morel hunts and they do their little contests. They actually include some of these things in their counts. But I have found these particular ones, these conicas, especially in the whitewater wildlife management areas. I've found them from time to time. I have never done anything with them. They give me pause. They make me worry. So they're not true morels, and I don't recommend them, but other people may have other thoughts about them. Next. And this is another one that's actually much more strikingly similar to probably a half-free morel. But the main difference is, again, the cap is only connected at the very, very top, and it has this pithy material, cottony-looking material on the inside. Verpa bohemica. And very seldom in fact, I have never found this in Minnesota. I'm not sure if it's really commonly found here at all. Obviously, it must not be because I have never found it, and I traipsed around an awful lot in the springtime looking around. But I don't know if Peter or anybody else has ever found one in Minnesota. Next. These are some of the other ones that are called false morels. Now, you have to really, really be careful with these. And you notice that, first of all, they're not hollow on the inside. If you do a cross section of them, they're very, very chambered. But people will call them red morels, snowbank morels, beefsteak morels, et cetera, because they're very robust, they're very heavy, and they're very tempting to take home and try to prepare them. Some of these can be prepared safely, but this particular one is most likely to have some toxins in it that are really, really dangerous toxins, and that are known to be actually a systemic poison. Next. All right, so these are two of the Gyromitras that are known to be particularly problematic, especially the esculenta, which is really funny because the scientific word esculenta means edible, but it's the one that is the least edible of every one of them. And so so scientific names are not necessarily even better than common names in being very accurate in this case. But actually, they were widely eaten in Europe, where there's a lot of preparation practices that have been refined, much like puffer fish can be eaten if you know exactly what the heck you're doing, but if you don't, you're going to poison yourself and you're going to die, or something bad's going to happen to you. So stay away from these guys, because there's a systemic toxin that's in these, and even during the preparation, if you're not very careful in how you're preparing it, you can actually ingest the fumes. So next, move on. All right, this is one of the ones that's that's a little bit more common, that we run into really frequently in the springtime. The common name elephant ears, kind of an elfin saddle kind of thing. Gyromitra brunea. You can find these in actually, pretty large numbers. But again, notice the chambers. Notice the cross section has lots of chambers in it, and it definitely does not have pits and ridges. So some people have eaten these without any ill effects, but you'd have to check with individuals who are more familiar with eating them, because I have no experience eating these, and I do not want to eat these. I like my morels. I know my morels need to be cooked enough so that I am safe to cook them. In fact, there's some individuals in our club that actually have developed sensitivity to eating morels, even fully cooked morels. So, you just don't want to get sick from something. So move on, please. Okay, so this is what we're talking about as far as the toxic chemical. It's carcinogenic, it's cumulative, and it actually, when it's heated, it actually breaks down into this monomethyl hydrazine, which is actually a component that can be found in rocket fuel. Not all of them have that, but some do. Next. Helvella species are another ones that we sometimes run into that are called false morels. But generally, you're not going to find these as much in the springtime as you would find these in the fall. So people will run into these near little spruce stands and other pine woods and things like that, and think maybe this is like a fall morel or something. But no, I mean, first of all, morels are springtime only in Minnesota. It isn't going to happen. So these also are chambered. I mean, they have many different chambers on the inside. And these are actually, recent DNA studies are suggesting that these Helvella species are actually more closely related to truffles than they are to some of the other mushrooms. So, it's like a truffle that's decided to break free from the ground or something, but don't treat them like truffles. that it's something that you're going to want to eat. So, all right, next. So there's a lot of different variations in morels. There's different colors, different shapes. They're like snowflakes, and each one is very unique. Even the yellow ones um, will show a conical structure. Peter showed you actually a couple of them that had like brownish tips on them. And that's, oftentimes due to drying out or frostbite or whatever, because they're growing in the springtime, early spring, into middle of the spring, and the weather is not very cooperative sometimes. So you can end up with a dry period, and you can end up with a little frostbite, you can end up with some windburn and a number of things. So you have a lot of variation. And as a morel generally matures, the pits will widen. The pits and ridges will widen, but not always. So next. This is like the classic. You find this, you take this home, you cut it off. So to cut or to pinch? Well, what you want to do is you want to keep the dirt out of your basket because you don't want dirt in these ridges. That's dirt is gritty. You're gonna unless you want to pay your dentist a lot of extra money for eating sand and dirt. You want to keep the stuff out of there, and the best way to do it is to keep it out of there from the beginning. So pinch or cut them off just above the surface. Do not disturb the mycelium. You're not going to be harming anything. In fact, the whole life cycle of a morel is so interesting that you're not going to really be disturbing or destroying the organism itself. Pretty much just about any way you harvest them, unless you're doing it with a bobcat. Next. And this one would be like a gray. All right. So, okay, there's a question. I see it right now. It's popped up. It says, so how long does one grow from a 1-inch one to like a 6-inch one? And there is no pat answer. There is no one answer. In fact, sometimes it may never grow much bigger. But then there's some that, they of course within a week, within 2 weeks, they're going to grow bigger. They're going to grow larger to these Bigfoots that tend to be much more crumbly and that type of stuff. So, but they're all the same mushroom, but there is no rule of thumb that you can follow. No easy answer is saying, well, if I let that little patch sit there, how how long do I wait before I go back? Well, if you can check it every day, well, by all means, run your own experiment. And about the time that they're starting to look maybe like they're a little weathered, then I'd harvest them. And you can find out, you can see, you can run your own little mini experiment if you want to, but you better have good control over that space, over that site where you're finding these, because if it's someplace where other people see it, they're not going to be there anymore. There are so many people, when you say you're a mushroom hunter, people instantly think morels. And it's people that would never dream to pick any other kind of mushroom in their wildest imagination. But they have picked morels. They used to pick morels as kids, as their family, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's pretty unlikely that if you leave a patch growing in a public area, that patch is going to be there when you come back in a couple of days. Somebody else is going to find them. Yeah. Okay. Aaron Berg saying MMS does not suggest foraging with the bobcat. He made, I love Aaron. He's so funny. So I meant like digging up the mycelium because basically, like any other mushroom, a morel, basically we're only seeing what we're talking about is the fruit body. And the mycelium is the organism itself, and it's growing with the root system of elm trees, ash trees, cottonwood trees, just like Peter mentioned. So that's the mycelium. And as long as you don't harm the mycelium itself, you're not damaging the entire organism. You're only picking the fruit. Okay, move on. Here's another one. This would be a nice mature. This would be a nice mature one. Tight. Um, Yeah, great one to, hopefully you're going to find, as Peter mentioned, hopefully you're going to find 5 or 6 or 7 of them close by, or 10 or 30 or 50 or 100 or whatever. And sometimes they do kind of bend over just for whatever reason, just because, they're a living thing, and sometimes they have variations in how they grow. Next. And some of them have a little bit taller stem to them. This is starting to grow a little thicker stem on the base, working towards a really, really mature mushroom. Next. This is a little tinier gray. Now, one of the questions that comes up all the time is it ethical to harvest a really immature morel mushroom or any mushroom that has not spored yet? Well, you can look at it in a whole bunch of different ways. First of all, they're spore shooters, so you really don't know whether it is spored at all or not. They start to spore really pretty quickly, probably at this stage even. They're probably starting to spore. And the previous picture probably was all spored out. But this one would probably still have some spores in it and stuff. But my simple answer is you can't find them all. And I don't care how good you are not finding all of them. And you're not depleting all the morels in the forest by picking the ones that you see and picking the ones that maybe a nice little gray one like this one. Next. Okay, so there's a couple more. Okay. And in some, again, you see so much variation. And a lot of times you see variation that occurs because of the trees that they're associated with. Now, I would guess, okay, go to the next one, please. I would almost guess that this one might be close to a cottonwood tree because my experience has told me that many of the ones that I find with bigger pits and ridges like this, oftentimes are associated with cottonwood trees. Now, it's not scientific, it's very anecdotal, but again, have fun with this yourself. As you're out in the woods and you're finding some, pay attention. Um, Pay attention to the trees that they're near and try to figure out what the host tree probably is. Because in all cases, there is a host tree somewhere. Okay, and this one again is a little bit tighter. This would be a little less mature. Next. And this is like prime. Absolutely prime. Most of us that morel hunt would just drool at these. So next. Now this is getting into some of the black morels. So I'm just go through this picture. You see it's more conical. Sometimes they do grow in clusters or, with twin heads. This is one of the weirdest ones I've ever seen, but they do grow very strange. And they will grow in little bunches like this. This is very, very nice when you see that. You see a little grouping like this, or like this, or like this. I'm getting the fever. Or like this, or like this. Yeah. And then there's, when you find them, what are you going to do with them? When you have a whole bunch of these guys, what are you going to do with them? And basically, you probably want to dry them. If you're not going to eat them all, you're going to want to dry them. So some people will actually lay them out on things and let them sun dry. I have a dehydrator, and so I'll dehydrate them, and it will concentrate the flavor, and then you can keep them for a long time. So here's some of the hints for it. String them, hang them up in a sunny place, a south-facing window, air dry them on screens or mesh. Use a dehydrator in a convection oven set at the lowest temperature. Some people will leave them on their dashboard, but I don't think I would recommend that because you'll end up with spores all over the place on the inside of your windshield. Um, you'll end up with a lot of sporing on your windshield and on your dashboard, and the humidity from them. You'll want to leave the windows kind of cracked and all kinds of stuff. But by all means, do not leave them outside overnight. There's critters that will come and gnaw and find them for you, especially if you're further up north, because I heard that flying squirrels really, really like these guys. I know that red squirrels kind of like them, and there's a number of other creatures that may come and actually harvest your mushrooms that you spent so much time getting them. Next. All right, so this is one of the common ways that if you're out camping, you just kind of prop up a mesh and you lay them all out. Of course, if it's really, really rainy, this is not going to work at all. If you get like a string of some humidity and then all of a sudden it gets really nice and cool and dry, then this will work really pretty well. But you do want to, if you're going to store these for any amount of time, you want to make sure that all the moisture is out of these guys. All right. And one of the questions in the chat I see is about vitamin D. Mushrooms do collect vitamin D from the sun. So, the more sunlight you give them access to, it could be that vitamin D is going to increase. But this is our mentor, Ron, with the smallest Morel that I have ever seen. Go to the next one. And this is one of the big ones. Go to the next. Another big one. Go to the next. Another really, really big one. This is really, really late season. One of the features of these late season ones is they tend to get really crumbly. So you have to be very, very careful on how you handle them. So the entire stem, you can't eat the stem, but the stem doesn't have a lot of flavor in it. So you cut it off at that area that's cracked above it. And then just treat it really, really carefully. Otherwise, you end up with all kinds of crumbles when you're taking it home. Next. And this is the biggest one we ever heard of. And this supposedly was growing in this guy's window well. So morels will grow in all kinds of weird spots. So, if your friends or neighbors all of a sudden say, "Hey, I got this weird mushroom growing in my yard," or somewhere near their house, by all means, go check it out, because you may find out that they're about ready to run over a bunch of morels with their lawnmower. So that could happen. All right, there you go.
Now I'm going to introduce Billy.
Yep.
He is going to share
Okay.
and talk about other things that you find in the woods.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm Billy, or William Rayson. And this is a cool picture that one of my friends, Jamie Baker, painted for me with different stone tools and kinds of mushrooms. I gave a lecture about the connection between archaeology and mushrooms last summer, and some good questions came out of it. It's not letting me go to the next slide. There we go. Okay, so yeah, I'm a CRM archaeologist, and I'm a member of the MMS Forager committee. CRM is Cultural Resource Management, and this is work that's legally required prior to development on public land or when public money is involved. And we work to mitigate damage to historical sites. So I got into mushroom hunting through archaeology, working in the national forests. And when I gave that lecture about archaeology and mushrooms, there was some questions that sort of led to me thinking about, well, I just want to basically go through what can you do to help protect historical sites if you encounter them while you're mushroom hunting. So there's artifacts are considered anything that are altered by humans that are 50 years old or older. And this includes things like old trash. This picture here, I'm observing something that we're going to talk about later, but it's actually a pretty unique artifact, even though it just looks like junk. So what do you do if you find an artifact while you're foraging? Well, legally, you can answer that question pretty quickly. It depends on what type of land you're on. So if you're on public land, it's most likely illegal to remove the artifact from its context. If you want, you can sort of record it by collecting a location and taking a photo and then notifying the agency in charge of the public land. If you're on private land and the artifact is not associated with a burial or a significant site, and as long as you have permission from the landowner, you're legally allowed to collect the artifact. However, there's some ethics that come into that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But you may be wondering, what is a significant site? It's defined by the National Register of Historic Places as having one or more of the following attributes. So the first one is an association with a famous event in history. And an example of a site that is eligible for listing under that criteria is Fort Snelling. It's tied to the founding of like the European American settlement of the Minnesota. Criterion B is association with a famous person in history. So a lot of the bigger mansions are often eligible for the National Register under that criterion. One example of that is the James J. Hill Mansion. And speaking of James J. Hill, the next criterion is significance in construction or design. And so an example of that is the Stone Arch Bridge. And the fourth one, we like to say D is for dig, is the potential for more information. So a site like Pipestone National Monument, well, it had a lot of significance to the indigenous populations in the past, and it continues to. So we don't necessarily want to destroy the site by doing invasive archaeological investigations. And then the other part of this, and so you have to be 50 years old, you have to have significance, and you also have to have integrity. So the Stone Arch Bridge currently is going through some renovations, and they have to use materials and construction methods that are sort of congruous with the original way that the bridge was designed in order to keep its status as a significant and eligible piece of our history. So just because it's legal to collect an artifact doesn't mean that it's helpful, because once an object is removed from the ground, its context is permanently removed from the site. So archaeological investigations are ultimately a destructive process. We remove piece by piece all of the context. And for the most part, we don't want to do that. We don't just want to find cool stuff, but we want to protect it. So here's a helpful poster that the Forest Service uses. And again, yeah, these are laws. You are not allowed to collect artifacts found on public land. So the best thing that you can do is to not pick it up or disturb it, but to rather mark the location and record it in that way. So where do we come in? Well, a lot of mushroom hunters want to be good stewards of the land. Maybe you'll find things other than mushrooms like trash. And is it bad to pick up old trash in the woods? Well, it can be, and it could be potentially illegal if you're on public land. And so let's just say a quick and really good rule for this is let's look at the most common piece of trash that you'll find, a beer can. So if we find the modern style that everyone knows, pictured in the bottom right, that's going to be something that likely doesn't represent something that's 50 years old or older. But if we see the other closure styles pictured on the left here, we have the pull tabs and church keys and punch tabs and whatnot. These are going to be older than 50 years and they are protected resources. The thing is, they don't belong to any one of us, archaeological materials, but they belong to all of us. So it's a public sort of science of past history. And, you know, piece by piece, it can get taken away. So it might sound counterintuitive, but it's actually part of the leave no trace mantra to not disturb archaeological sites, including this old can that we found here on the 2024 Cloquet Foray. I don't have a picture to show you of what the bottom looked like, but there was some patent numbers that I looked up, and it is a US military issued gas can, which is from the 30s. And I'm thinking it likely represents civilian conservation corps efforts, which is FDR's treat army. They were trying to stimulate the economy by having people, excuse me, building trails and structures and things like that. So it's a really cool piece of history that's almost 100 years old. And this single gas can that we found during this foray was the only like evidence of that site in the area. So if we would have taken it, the evidence of the CCC being there is gone. So that's just an example of why you would want to leave what really is actually just old trash. So that's all I got. And maybe you own artifacts that you collected from public land. That's okay. No one's going to arrest you. But there are ways that you can deal with it to try to help the artifact or try to honor the people who, you know, may have made it or whatever. You could contact the agency where the artifact was discovered, repatriate to local tribes or museums. But one option too, if you wish to keep it, a lot of these things, they're going to last longer than us, you know, rock, even bone, they outlive our flesh, you know? And so you found it and it has that story, but it might be helpful if you could write on the artifact with pen or something where you found it for future people to understand what it is, where it came from. So if you ever find anything cool, you can feel free to reach out to me. My email address is willrracing@gmail.com. And that's all I got, unless there's any questions. So thank you. Stop and share.
Thank you so much. John and Claudette were asking about fossils, and are they kind of a part of that same?
So
Yeah.
I don't know exactly about the permitting for like extracting geological resources, because a lot of them were talking about like more intrusive using pickaxes and whatnot. But paleontology is not protected in the way that archaeology is. From my understanding, a lot of paleontologists will and are able to legally and ethically sell the dinosaur bones that they find. Here in Minnesota, you know, we're at the bottom of the ocean a couple 100 million years ago, but we have some cool fossils too. I collect like animal bones all the time in the woods that are non-cultural. and rocks and fossils too. But generally, I wouldn't want to disturb like a cool like rock outcrop that has fossils in it. It's probably legal with proper permitting and whatnot.
This is Mike Kempenick, and he is the gentleman forager, a foraging educator, and impresario, and he's going to talk a little bit about finding black morels.
Peter asked you to talk a little bit about black morels, which is something that I really enjoy, as opposed to, I kind of joke about, it's the one that if you don't want to follow the crowds, you can head north in search of something that's a little bit different, but still has a lot of the very same things you're looking for in the way of yellow morels. I like to call it Minnesota's less popular cousin. And if you'll move ahead there, Peter, historically, black morels have been classified, well, as things have progressed over many years, and really every year you see different classifications, things moving around a little bit. Originally, we talked about them being either elata or conica, which are both mushrooms that are really not found in Minnesota. But we do have a couple here, which are Morchella augusticeps and Morchella septentrionalis. And those two are really the black morels that we find here in Minnesota. You can move ahead, Peter. The one that you're seeing right there is augusticeps. And John actually earlier alluded to one of the ways that you can distinguish between the two species of black morels being that really sort of divot when you turn over the mushroom and you look at the stem and the cap, and there's really a bit of a divot there. Yeah, so if you look at side by side, I think everybody can pretty plainly see that they look like very different. I mean, they definitely both look like morels, but to even an untrained eye, I think people see the difference. Maybe the difference between a sunfish and a crappie. They're both fish, but there's still some very visible differences in them. That black is more elongated and not nearly as big. Those dark ridges are a constant, throughout their life cycle. Unlike the yellows, you're really not going to see that. Every once in a while, you might see a little bit of browning if it dries out on a yellow, but that's about it. That groove underneath, I wished I had a photo I could have found to turn one of those upside down and show you, but there's just a little groove. Maybe it's an eighth of an inch between where the stem meets the margin of the cap. And on the septentrionalis species, you'll see that the cap meets the stem right at the margin. There isn't any divot. But lighter color. The other thing you might notice is the pits on a yellow morel are much more random. If you look at the mushroom on the left there, you'll note that they're pretty, well, they're not pretty uniform, but they're somewhat uniform. They're somewhat vertically uniform, much more so than a yellow morel would be. And they can come in a few different colors, mostly dependent upon light conditions. Sometimes I find them when they're growing in nice sunny areas where they're almost, they really are sort of a golden, but they always retain that very distinguished black look on the edges of the honeycomb there. You can move ahead. Where do we find these? Well, it's a little bit different than the yellow mushrooms, and it's probably part of the reason I enjoy it so much. The game for yellow mushrooms is really looking for dead and dying elms or cottonwoods or some of the other trees you associate with, and you find a dead tree and you run up to the tree and you look around the area of the tree, and if you don't find anything, you're really off to look for the next tree. You're not necessarily always really looking for mushrooms first. You're really looking for those dead and dying trees. With black morels, really quite a bit different in that they relate to a couple of different things. Septentrionalis really relates almost exclusively to aspen, and really any species of aspen. But on augusticeps, and some of those can actually be found in parts closer to the cities. There you will find them in hardwood forests, mixed hardwood forests. They could be, in oaks or ash or other trees beyond aspen. But if you're in northern Minnesota, I would say that would be, north of Brainerd or so, north of the 43rd parallel, really. It's quite specific. It's the only region that's been found growing in. So once you get above that 43rd parallel, you're really mostly finding Septentrionalis. But occasionally I do find them mixed in, growing right next to each other. So it's not a hard and fast rule. But for me personally, I spend most of my time looking in aspen groves. I look for decaying logs that are growing there, that they've got sufficient leaf ground cover to maintain moisture. I don't want it to be in bright open sunlight or areas that's going to be windswept and wick a lot of that moisture away very quickly. So shady slopes are often kind of nice, or often in the woods up in northern Minnesota, you'll find a lot of these sort of mossy mounds growing in the woods. Those mounds are always quite interesting to me as well. They start in late April, really about now. It's interesting in that most people think of black morels as being after yellow morels, but they really pop at just about the exact same time. The difference being that you can imagine in northern Minnesota, the temperatures are typically a bit lower than they are down here in the cities, and the temperatures that these mushrooms can grow in is substantially lower. I've picked growing black morels in 38-degree soil temperatures, so they're a much hardier mushroom. Go ahead, Peter. You can move ahead. Yeah, they as I mentioned there, the areas that they favor. But one thing I thought people might find interesting, and I know I've had a lot of discussions with Peter over the years just for fun, talking about, gee, wouldn't it be great if we had burn morels here in Minnesota? And there actually is one documented case of burn morels here in Minnesota from a mycologist back in the 70s, Herbert Jacobson. And this was, in fact, verified, and was Morchella exuberans, which is the species that is most often picked in the massive fires in the western U.S. So I find that quite interesting. And apparently this took place in a kind of jack pine area that had been burned, which I also personally found very interesting, because I don't find black morels in jack pine. So the burn, they may be living there all of our lives and we never see them. But the burn obviously at least at some point produced that. And so, I would have to assume it's likely that they do exist here, and that there isn't a lot of opportunity or a lot of interest in finding the areas that they might be in. But interesting nonetheless. They are smaller. They're probably weight-wise, they're probably 4 to 1 or 5 to 1 to a regular morel. I always feel like the flavor profile though is a little bit stronger, so I don't mind that so much. Go ahead, Peter. So yeah, we were talking a little bit about the difference between Augustus seps and Septentrionalis. Really, it's just that groove. I mean, you do see the one on the right is Septentrionalis, and you note that the pits are a little wider. It's sort of a chunkier looking mushroom, and you'll note the one there in the upper left has a narrower stem that's actually smaller than the margins where the cap are, as opposed to the one on the right. And again, if you turn that down, you'd notice a slight groove where it meets that stem. And I think I got ahead of myself. I think I mentioned that it's a 45th parallel of the 43rd. Yeah, right now I was out just poking around yesterday. I have talked to a few people who have picked a few. So they're just starting, and I would expect to see them going in good numbers probably in the next 10 days to 2 weeks. Go ahead, Peter. And why I like it is I started to talk about how you go and look for a tree and you never really, you don't feel like you're looking for, at least I don't. I never feel like I'm really looking for mushrooms so much as I'm looking for dead and dying elm trees. And to me, that gets a little monotonous over time. I like when I'm in the woods and I'm looking at a lot of different factors. I'm looking for the trees, of course, but I'm looking for the soil conditions, and I'm looking for the neighboring areas and what other mushrooms I might be finding there. There's also massive areas in northern Minnesota that have aspen. And so, there's an incredible, hundreds of thousands of acres that could be looked through. And when you do find a nice patch of black morels growing, they'll often be growing in that same area for 10 years, as opposed to, maybe 3 years or 4 years in the case of yellow morel. And so that makes it a little more fun. And the fact that, instead of finding, a good tree and a dying elm, maybe you might find a dozen mushrooms there and you'd be pretty happy with that. But you can sometimes find hundreds of black morels growing in an area that might only be, 10 yards by 10 yards kind of thing. So I find that quite exciting too. They don't jump out. They're much smaller. They're probably a quarter of the size, and they've got that black and brown hue to them, which of course really blends in well to their surroundings. So it makes it much more difficult to spot. Thankfully, it's a lot like yellow mushrooms, and that when you finally do spot one, they tend to come into focus a little bit easier for you. But it adds to the challenge to really have an eagle eye. It's a much tougher mushroom to spot if you haven't hunted for them before. They really like, as this third thing mentions here, that they're often tucked near fallen branches or moss or depressions or old rotting logs. And that always catches my attention too. Go ahead, Peter. So if I gave you my 4 takeaways, they would be these, which would be, they're distinctly different. They're not at all, just a young yellow morel. They do fruit earlier in the season if you're thinking about soil temps, but about the same time of the season if you're comparing it to the yellow morel season. Augustus ceps, like I mentioned, it can be in there with sort of mixed hardwoods, ash, or even oak. But if you're looking for Septentrionalis, which I find more readily, they're almost exclusively in aspen-dominated forests, and really you're looking for those areas that are not old forests. They're areas that have maybe been growing for about 15 years, and those trees might be about the size of your forearm. And they might be 20 feet tall or so. And when that happens, a lot of those trees start thinning themselves out. If you spend any time in the Northwoods, you'll note that when they do clear cutting or otherwise an area is cleared out, those aspen come in huge numbers, and it's kind of almost like planting carrots in a garden. They get very thick, very close together, and then at about that 10-year mark, many of them begin to die off to make room for the more healthy. And that's when those mushrooms start to fruit. And I guess lastly, just a point of interest for everybody, for years, now really more than a decade, I've studied them, quite hard. And I found it very perplexing where I find these mushrooms, because I routinely find them growing out of dead wood. I had a photo here. I wished I'd put it in. I realized I didn't, but I even have one that's growing directly out of the trunk of a tree. So I find that very interesting. And from everything that I've read and what few studies have really looked at this in much detail, I personally concluded that these mushrooms are both mycorrhizal, and at different points in their life cycle, they consume dead wood and lignin and cellulose. Just like mushrooms, you think of like chicken of the woods or oyster mushrooms. So, those areas where you're in the woods and you have some nice aspen growing, and there's a lot of dead wood kind of laying around, that sort of thing. Those are good areas to look in. Next. And if you're really interested, we're going to be doing a fun one up in Grand Rapids, which is a great area, and we've talked the good folks of UPM Blandon paper mill up there to let us be on their acreage, on their private property, for a big morel hunt up there. So if you're looking to learn more or try something a little bit different, I hope you'll visit the website and come join us up there. We'll have a good time the weekend of the 16th through the 18th. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them for you.
Well, I had a comment.
This is Steve Hyland from up in Duluth.
Sure.
I've been picking these black things for years, about 30 miles north of here on the way to Brimson.
Sure.
It's exactly what you describe. It's these little popple trees mixed in with balsams.
Yep.
It's an area that was logged off, maybe 20 years ago.
Right.
So there's an area there that I find them regularly. And what's that?
Well, I was just going to add that you can actually find some yellows up north. Most often you'll find them when they do a clear cut. And a clear cut might produce 5% of the time. But when it does produce, it produces in huge numbers, and it can often include both yellow and black morels growing.
I've never seen yellow ones, but I find the black ones like last year, I think it was like May 20th, where I found, like you said, in one spot, like maybe 100 square feet, I found 72 of them.
Yeah.
One place.
Yeah. That'll get a guy excited, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, I didn't find them anywhere else except in that one spot.
Well, you didn't need to. You can't be
exactly.
greedy, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mike, that's fun to hear that you can find them in larger numbers. I haven't found them, but my brother's a turkey hunter, and on occasion will all of a sudden say, "Oh, we found 400 or we found 200 or something." Some crazy, I mean, they're obviously counting them because they're happy.
You jump on them and you're like, I call BS on that. Come on. Right?
Yeah, but that is fun. And I put the link to your Black Morel Hootenanny in the chat a couple times for anyone who can make it up to Grand Rapids. I know that there's always food or music or just a lot of different things. I think Grand Rapids was also having maybe sort of like a vendor fair. So it sounded like a lot of things going on that weekend. And
yeah, we're really hoping that over the next 3 years that this becomes a Minnesota tradition. I've always been bothered by the fact that we're surrounded by states that have these big morel festivals, and for whatever reason we don't. So I'm very happy to have Grand Rapids working with us to make that happen. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, from what I've heard from people who have been to your other events, that they usually get to learn how to find mushrooms and take some home. So I will.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, Mike doesn't keep your mushrooms. You all get to take them home.
Right. Awesome. Did anyone else have any other questions? Oh, and someone posted a picture of, Stephen, thank you. You posted pictures of your black morels.
Nice.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mike. Really appreciate you helping us out here and teaching us some things. Next, I've got Hannah Kim from the Minnesota Extension. She's been waiting patiently to share her screen with us and talk a little bit about identifying invasive species and doing our best to keep from adding to their spread. Go ahead, Anna.
Perfect. Thank you, Peter. Hello, everyone. It's great to see so many people out here ready to get outside and enjoy the warm weather. My name is Hannah Kim, like Peter said. I'm an extension educator with the University of Minnesota Extension, and I'm in the forestry department, natural resources department. But yeah, Peter wanted me to talk to you about terrestrial invasive species today. So land-dwelling species, because I don't think you folks will be out in the water looking for mushrooms, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. But we'll be talking about best practices for prevention and reporting today. So just a reminder, I'm sure all of you folks know what invasive species are, but this is usually determined by either the state or the federal government, and it has to be two things. The first is a non-native species. So this is kind of broad. We could be talking about not native to the United States, not native to Minnesota, not native to Hennepin County. So this is why, again, it's usually by state. And then the next thing it has to be or do is actually cause ecological or economic harm or human health problems as well. And so that can mean a lot of different things too. And it can be both direct and indirect. But since we're living in a highly mobile and global world that is really increasing and accelerating the spread of invasive species, and since you folks are the ones out there in our forests, on our natural areas, this is just a good reminder again of what we can do. The best thing is prevention. And so let's say we are going out into a state forest. We are going to go foraging, find some mushrooms. Even before we leave the house, when we are gathering our gear up together, you should inspect your gear, your clothing for seeds, vegetation, mud, because some things could be stuck on there from your last foray or your last trip out, and dispose of that in the trash, those little tiny bits. I would also recommend that you take some time to learn how to identify those invasive species in your area. I know we are kind of across Minnesota here, a lot of folks from different places, so get familiar with those invasive species around your area. Once we get to the forest or wherever we are during our activity, again, periodically check for things stuck to you. I call those hitchhiker species, those seeds. We've all gotten a ton of seeds on our pants or our socks, our sleeves. And I know it's hard to stay on trail sometimes when you're out foraging and looking for mushrooms, but when you are off trail, just being very careful about where you're stepping. Don't step on native plants, because if you disrupt a habitat, then that could create an opportunity for invasive species to come in. They love disturbed areas. And then be careful to not step on those invasive species, because again, you'll get those hitchhikers going into the mud, under your boots, on your clothes, and you don't want to take those and spread those back to your house, your garden, areas by you. And then after you are done, but before you leave the site, so let's say we're still at the forest. When you are there, make sure that you clean off your boots and your gears. Sometimes we're putting our baskets in the mud or the dirt. Make sure you get all of that off as best as you can. Check yourself, check your pets. If you have a dog, you know what it's like to take those seeds off of the dogs. It's a hassle, but it's very important to do so. I have a boot brush pictured there, and I'll be talking a little bit more about those. So hopefully we'll be able to get Peter some of these so you can have them in your little foray kits. This is very, very helpful. These are actually horse hoof picks. So this is used to get stuff out of horses' hoofs, but they are really helpful for getting stuff out of our boots as well. You can get them. I'll have some alternatives in just a second. There are a lot of stations at trailheads and state parks and stuff like that. They are really useful. And alternatives, like I said, this is my Google search for a hoof pick or a brush. They are very cheap. You can also use a cleaning supply brush, whatever works. You don't need this specific brush to do this. I've also used sticks before that I found before I get in my car. Just get the mud, get the seeds out of my boots, and get going. So that way I don't, again, spread it unintentionally. Another way that you can help, so prevention is one thing. We also want to detect where these species are. Again, Peter said you are out there in these lands that might not be stepped on besides you folks. And so the thing that I would advise you to do is take pictures. Make sure that they are clear pictures. Sometimes we want contrasting backgrounds. So for worms, for example, they might be the same color as your hand or the dirt. So put them against a piece of paper if you have one, or the concrete. You can get multiple pictures, so some with the details and some with the overall site, so we can see what the site looks like, how it's affecting the habitat. You can get multiple angles. Sometimes it's helpful to have something next to the species for scale, so a pen or a key. And then when you take a picture, most of the time if it's on your phone, it will note the location as well as the time and date. And this is really important because once we report it, then that is when researchers, scientists, and all of us, we can go in and look and track the distribution, the time it's taking to spread across the state. So a lot of species now, they are actually coming from the East Coast, not native to the United States, but they've been introduced in the East Coast, and they're moving slowly our way going into Minnesota. And so let me just, before I move on, take pictures. There are really handy dandy apps on our phone that I will show you next, but even if you don't have reception or even if you don't know how to work the apps right now, take a picture and you can input it into the databases at a later date or time. So these are the two apps that I would recommend. iNaturalist, I'm sure you are all familiar with iNaturalist. If not, I would really recommend it. It helps tremendously with identification. It's a great community. The next one I would recommend is EdMaps or EDD Maps. And so this is similar to iNaturalist. It is a app on your phone, both iPhone and Android. It is also a website, so you can access it on the computer, on your phone, wherever you would like. The difference with EdMaps is while you post your picture and your identification, your report, every report will be verified by a professional. And that is usually someone at the DNR level, someone who knows what they are looking at. And sometimes they actually go out to the site to identify and confirm that those species are there. And so what that does for, I mean, everyone, but for me, it tells me that this is research grade. It's verified. And then other educators, other scientists, researchers, we will use that to analyze, and we can then go out to the site and try to manage the invasive species that are there, the population, or we can use it for our research purposes. We are doing a lot of work to try to change policy sometimes, just doing what's best for the environment and ecosystem. But us researchers and educators, we can't go out there and touch every corner of Minnesota. That's why we need your help, because you folks will be out there. And so reporting is very, very important. So I'm not going to get too deep into these, but these are some common invasives that you might see around southeast Minnesota. That includes the Twin Cities. Get familiar with these. They will be in forested areas, garlic mustard, non-native bush honeysuckles, and buckthorn. If you see these species out and about, it is definitely still important to report these. The more data, the better. But the ones that we kind of want to focus on are these early detection species. So in the chat, I put in a link to the Minnesota DNR page. They list the early detection species that we are looking out for right now, because these are species that don't have a lot of distribution right now in Minnesota, again, because they are probably creeping their way into the state, but they were assessed and they're deemed to be highly aggressive, or they are really likely to have a high risk impact on our ecosystems and on our habitats. So here we have Grecian foxglove, roundleaf bittersweet, jumping worms. This is the one I'll be talking about right now. So to get more information about jumping worms, please head to the website that I posted in the chat. Very briefly, I will say the differences between, I don't know if you can see where my mouse is, but oh, okay,
yeah,
great. Perfect, thank you. So when we are looking at worms, at the top here we have jumping worms, and then on the bottom we have European earthworms. So these jumping worms are relatively new to Minnesota. I'd say like 10 to 15 years they've been here, but their impact is definitely increasing because they are spreading. And so the main differences between these ones that we are trying to report and look out for in the European earthworms, they have what's called a clitellum. They both have these. You can see the jumping worm, the color is a little more pale, almost gray, light pink, and it is flat. It is flush to the rest of the worm there. It is also closer to the head compared to the European earthworm, about 14 or 15 segments to the head here. If you look at the European earthworm, the clitellum is a darker color, more of a brown, red. It is further away from the head, so 23 to 30 segments away from the head here, and this will be raised. The clitellum will be raised. I will say that right now they are just starting to emerge from the ground. They are feeding on the leaf litter, and they will not look like this. They will not develop into adults until about, I'd say, July, August, September is when they are full-grown adults, and it'll be easier to identify. The other thing is they're called jumping worms because when you pick them up and hold them in your hand, they will squirm around. They might not get a bunch of air, they might not hop like a bunny, but it'll be kind of like a snake if you've ever seen one of those moved, held one of those. They will be very active, and you can look up a lot of videos on that and how to identify jumping worms. But the reason we are looking for these right now is because they are, if you're a gardener, you're probably very familiar with these jumping worms, but they are spreading and starting to go into our forested areas and our natural areas. And that, of course, decreases native biodiversity, native plants. It also increases soil erosion, and it will just change the whole soil structure of an entire forest. And so here we can see their cocoons, essentially their eggs, or how they spread. You can really see how tiny they are. They are little. And this is one of them within its poop, basically. But as you can see, it will get really mixed in with the mud and the dirt, and it will definitely get stuck in your boots. So that's why it is so important to clean off the mud from your boots when you are at a site. Just one or two of these, if they get moved to a new location, then it definitely has the potential to create a whole infestation and a whole new population. Just one or two of these little cocoons. So again, that's why it's very important to clean off your boots and stuff like that. Also, if you find these out when you have your hands in the dirt looking for mushrooms, you're close to the ground, definitely report them. I'm working on a research project right now. We're trying to find more sites with jumping worms in them in the natural areas and forested areas, so that way we can quantify the erosion impacts that jumping worms have in our forests. And we are hoping to help landowners better manage for jumping worms. So that's the whole goal of the project. But again, we need more eyes on the ground. We need more sites to be reported, or more jumping worm sightings to be reported. So if you are interested, again, just really quick, I dropped the link to our website with more participatory science projects in it. And again, you can help with research. You can help us answer some of these questions further along policy and management. We do have a Facebook and Instagram page where we post updates. And that is all I have. Thank you for listening, and thank you for taking action to protect our environment and our ecosystems. If you have any questions, I can try to take them now, or I know we're short on time. Feel free to email me.
Where are some of the sites that you've found them in already in Minnesota?
Yeah, so as of right now, I'm trying to think of a couple off the top of my head. They are in a lot of gardens and a lot of yards. But some natural areas that we found them in, down in Plummer House in Rochester. We found them in, what's it called? Riley Creek Conservation Area in Eden Prairie. And so those are the two sites we've identified we're going to do some research on. Again, we found them in a lot of, or we see reports of them in homes and gardens and yards, and we are thinking they definitely have spread already to those natural areas next to those houses, next to those yards. Just nobody has gotten out there to report them yet. So if you can do that, that would be very helpful.
There was one other question in the chat. It was about, let's see, are there any any controls for the worms?
Yeah, that is a great question. As of right now, it is really hard to say. There's very little research on it. A lot of gardeners and a lot of people have tried a lot of things. If you go on our tips website, so the first link I dropped, let's see, we do have, if you go to the completed projects tab, we do have a jumping worms management project that we did that goes over, I'll just drop this in the chat. It goes over a lot of management that was done. Here we go. So take a look at that if you're interested. One thing you can do, it's called solarizing. So it's putting tarp over your soil if you're worried that you have jumping worms. Jumping worms and the cocoons, if they get heated up to a certain degree over a certain amount of time, like 3 days, they will die. But that is a very, very high temperature. So if you are trying to compost it yourself in your own composting system, that's not going to work because it doesn't get hot enough. It needs to be like the industrial composters that actually reach that heat. Again, the one thing is, if you are going to these plant sales, you need to ask them what they are doing to prevent jumping worms or prevent diseases too, because the process they use for preventing diseases, they go through a lot of heat that will also kill jumping worms in the cocoons. So ask them. Be careful when you're getting mulch and sand and soil from community places or other people as well, because again, jumping worms really like wood chips and mulch, stuff like that. So it is, again, it's really hard to say how to manage them right now, but prevention is the best thing that you can do when taking in plants and materials for your own yard.
Well, thank you very much, Anna.
Yep.
Very much appreciate it. And it's a invasive species, things like jumping worms. I can't believe they'd be good for mushrooms. And we know that garlic mustard is definitely not good for mushrooms. So
Yeah.
they don't get along. So
thank you for sharing the link to the brushes too. I think that's something we can definitely spread the word about amongst our membership, and we can also share your links with our membership.
All right. Thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it.